If you're like most people, you don't really see drones day to day. Outside of hobby stuff, maybe some filming, it's not like you're seeing a drone pass your window every morning. But I think we're on the edge of a shift where drones are going to become normal, like boringly normal. And the reason isn't because the tech suddenly got invented. The reality is it's been here, and the real bottleneck is the rules. Here's something that really caught my attention. The FAA went from roughly 1,200 approvals for beyond visual line of sight in 2020 to over 26,000 in 2023. That's not a slow trend, that's a step change. In this video, I want to peel back the layers a bit more. Help you understand what Part 108 is and what that means for autonomous flights, why national security is forcing a supply chain overhaul, and really where we're likely going to see a lot more of these drones in the future. Quick caveat, I'm not a drone expert. I'm just trying to bridge the gap from those that live this every day and the rest of us. I've been pretty deep in research on this topic, and I've been fortunate to talk with a lot of folks from all sorts of different walks of life related to this. Everything from government folks to military folks to people that are building drones, people that are helping folks to build drones. And that's kind of where I fit in this weird cross section. So I get access to a lot of information that maybe most people might not necessarily see. So hopefully this will help connect the dots in a way that's useful. Because what I see is that there's pretty big shifts coming, and I think it's good to talk about that, to try to think about how does this impact the job market, how does this impact, business, what are some of the opportunities that this might present. So we'll get into a bunch of that in this video. We already have loads of different drones that can do amazing things. The tech, that's not the issue. The issue is the rules and the economics that come with those rules that make it very difficult for a business to actually function. So the bottleneck isn't really capabilities or capacity, it's really permission. That's why the regulatory environment matters so much, and we're going to talk about that. So let's start first with FAA Rule Part 107. It's a basic rule book that made commercial drones real. It gave us a standard path. Get certified as a pilot, fly small drones, and just operate within these guardrails. The big limiter is visual line of sight, or VLOS. In plain English, somebody has to be able to see the drone with their own eyes. That's fine for a lot of things, but most scaled use cases need things like flying further than a person can see, repeatable routes reliably, and to do it without a ton of labor. Under Part 107, you basically have an operator tied to every aircraft and oftentimes an observer too. So you get a world of pilot programs, cool demos, not often real business. Now, to be fair, there are companies doing more than that, and that's because of waivers. Waivers are basically the FAA saying, okay, you've done this safely in these set defined rules, now we'll allow you to go beyond that. But the waiver world is limited, and it's not the kind of thing that you build a broad industry on. Part 108 is the FAA's framework to move beyond visual line of sight from special permission to an actual framework. And BVLOS is the unlock. That's how you get to a drone inspecting miles of pipeline or launching from a dock automatically, and eventually a delivery that isn't basically a marketing stunt. Now, granted, these things are happening now, but they're happening just through these special permissions and waivers. And this is where it gets a little tricky because those that fought really hard to get that permission under 107 are not really excited about the idea of more people getting access to it through Part 108, which I understand. And to be fair, I think there still will be limitations, not necessarily just you're open to these possibilities, but just makes that process a little bit simpler. Now, here's the important nuance. Part 108 is effectively creating two lanes. Lane 1, routine operators. Lower risk, more repeatable. Think rural routes, agricultural, linear infrastructure, so you don't need a bespoke waiver every time. Lane 2 is certified operations. Higher risk, but honestly, this is the holy grail. Urban delivery, operations over people, dense logistics, the risky stuff. This looks more like aviation, manuals, training programs, safety management systems, and potentially aircraft type certifications. And here's the line that matters for economics. Part 108 starts to move us towards a one-to-many system. Instead of one pilot per drone, you move towards a supervisor model. people monitoring multiple aircrafts from a remote operations center. And this is important. It doesn't automatically allow you to have 20 drones and one operator. This is kind of a systematic approach to get there in some instances. The FAA is still conservative. The baseline posture is closer to one aircraft, one flight coordinator, unless you're operating under a method that the FAA accepts that supports a higher ratio. So the way I think about it is they're building a ramp. Framework first, then scale comes from aircraft design, detect and avoid maturity, operator training, and the FAA approving those one-to-many methods over time. And honestly, as a member of the general public that lives in an urban environment, I kind of appreciate that. I want them to be careful about this. I want a system that scales safely. The point is, this is where drone delivery starts to become viable. Currently, it usually costs between $15 and $30 to do a drone delivery under the current rules, but if you were able to use this one-to-many autonomous beyond visual line of sight, you could potentially get closer to a range that's actually acceptable of a couple dollars to maybe $5. So you could see how the economics can change pretty quickly here. But where are we actually going to see drones first? This is where the public often gets a wrong image. We're not moving quickly into a drone delivering a burrito on my balcony. The first version is the boring stuff that actually scales. And I'm sure I'm going to miss a lot of things here, but I'm going to try my best to share what I know. Love to hear from you guys, some of the things that you think or what you predict here. So you have emergency and public safety. Drones as a first responder, as it's called, or DFR. You have the drone-in-a-box model. A call comes in, the drone launches, and you get eyes on the scene fast. Birdstop is a good local example in this category. The whole idea is to get eyes on the scene within 60 seconds in any covered area. It's pretty impressive. And this is a good example of where these waivers come in, because Part 108 is only a proposal at this point, although it's pretty far along. They're operating under Part 107, but they have many waivers, actually 9 of them, which allows them to do all sorts of things that the average person is not going to be able to do. So they can operate in a dense city because they've proven they can do so safely. And this is not an easy task. Next, we have infrastructure and utilities. Think power lines, pipelines, bridges, rail, all the stuff we rely on but never think about. It's constant, expensive, and sometimes dangerous. Drones are basically the eyes in the sky without rolling a truck out every time. Then we have medical and critical logistics. Think blood, lab samples, organs, urgent meds, anything where minutes matter. This one gets obvious real fast when you think about a member of your family needing something quickly. Agriculture is another area growing rapidly, crop monitoring, spraying, and honestly, this might be one of the cleanest beyond visual line of sight wins because you have less risk. I mean, that's the biggest concern when you're dealing with this stuff. It's collisions, but also dropping on a human. When you're dealing with farmland or something like that, in theory, the risk is pretty low. Similar to rural areas, that's why a lot of companies operate in places like that. Another use case that's pretty common is construction and surveying. You get into mapping, volumetrics, progress data, the boring stuff that prevents mistakes and saves time. Industrial ops and warehousing is another. And this is one that people wouldn't really necessarily think about, but you can count inventory, just have more visuals on your facility, on what's going on inside. This actually gets into this other thing that I thought about when you have like a large building and you want to cover that with sprinklers, for example. One of the challenges is maybe you want to be able to defend against a battery fire, for example. You could potentially have a drone that's ready to go to address an issue in a very specific area. And I've actually seen this in action. It's pretty impressive. So instead of retrofitting new or different sprinklers that might be able to better address battery concerns, you can use a drone for that. And it has a special solution that's specifically designed to handle battery fires. There's so many other things that we could talk about here of use cases, painting, of cleaning a building, of inspection, all these things, right? And then obviously the delivery one, This is the one that could be one of the biggest, but might not necessarily be the first in most areas. Because really for delivery, you need the routes, you need the infrastructure, you need a lot of these other pieces. Because really the question that most people ask when you think about this is like, won't the sky just turn into chaos? It's gonna initially look a lot less like a free-for-all and all drones can kind of go wherever, and more of a managed route system. You'll start with things like corridors, basic lanes in the sky, then geofencing, which will restrict where you can fly. Then you'll have, special IDs that might allow different groups to fly in different areas depending on your ability to manage conflicts. This is the big topic. It's deconfliction. How do you handle if a drone is approaching and it's coming into your area? I mean, the nice thing is you have plenty of space and these things are not really that large and they generally operate in a height different than aircrafts. But that being said, folks can kind of go out of bounds, do things that are unexpected, and these are important things to think about here. So I haven't really gotten that deep into what's happening in other states and cities. I know that there's a lot of movement in many places, but I've been pretty close to a lot of what's happening here in Michigan. I'm actually in this advanced aerial mobility zone right now, which is centering around Michigan Central and New Lab. So this allows companies to operate with less restrictions and it's more of a controlled airspace. Part of that is because it's being monitored. So there's a company called Airspace Link and they operate at Michigan Central and New Lab. They basically have like air traffic control for drones. This is something that's more of a developing space, but they're definitely one of the leaders. Part of enabling more of these autonomous operations and that sort of thing is you need somebody like Airspace Link to operate the sky to really allow for monitoring and managing that to make sure that there aren't issues. And they're expanding that and kind of creating some of these routes as we talked about before. One of them is from Ann Arbor to Detroit, which is about 40 miles. So they're basically creating this corridor where companies can operate more freely with this beyond visual line of sight. From there, they're going to expand to all sorts of other areas as well, to Battle Creek, Michigan, to Traverse City, and they're building a lot of other aspects as well for testing, for maintenance, for larger drones, for these EVTOL sort of systems that could even potentially carry people. Really, you could see how this is starting to develop more and more. The governor actually signed this executive directive, which is specifically to support this activity. And if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense because Michigan is really well positioned to be a manufacturer of a lot of these products. And as it's already proven to start to be true, leveraging a lot of this supply chain that was built up for automotive, much of that can be used for these devices as well. So when I say that the sky likely is not going to turn into chaos, it really is based on this idea that we're probably going to have more of these corridors and that sort of thing. And it kind of looks a little bit more like train lines and highways and less just like a free-for-all. Although some companies do have a lot of flexibility, but it requires a lot of coordination and communication, and that's where that experience comes in. Another reference point I like to think about here is the early internet. It felt really chaotic and there was a lot going on and there was some standards, but it was kind of limited. You start to develop more and more of these protocols, and now we have this really robust infrastructure and ecosystem to depend on and to build on, and you really eventually move into a direction where it feels a little invisible. I anticipate in some ways what we'll see here as well. I don't think you could really make a broad video today about drones and not talk about war. So we need to get into that. And as somebody that's been to war, it's not the most comfortable topic, but I also recognize the importance of it. The reality is one of the main reasons why this drone thing is moving so fast recently is because of war. Ukraine basically proved that drones are kind of becoming the de facto standard and the cost to impact is hard to ignore. It may seem like I'm being insensitive when discussing this, but I just really want to be real about the situation. When you see regulators and the Pentagon and investors sprinting at the same time, it's not random. This is where the term dual use really matters. Dual use just means a technology that's valuable commercially as well as for defense purposes. And historically, a lot of the stuff we take for granted got pulled forward this way. GPS is a good example. The early internet is another. A lot of parts of our transportation infrastructure was framed this way. The interstate highway system was initially framed as National System of Interstate and Defense Highways. Airports are kind of similar. Now, I'm not celebrating any of that, but that's just how the world works. When something becomes strategically important, the pace changes. I'm filming this December 14th, and we're 9 days away from a possible DJI ban, which from my perspective likely seems like it's going to happen. So I want to talk about that a little bit. If you ever seen a drone in the wild, it's likely a DJI drone. I mean, they really own the market for the most part. And the issue isn't DJI makes bad drones, they make great drones. The issue is drones are effectively flying sensor platforms. They're capturing video, thermal, infrastructure data, site layouts, sometimes even patterns of life. And once you frame it that way, it becomes uncomfortable, the idea that a huge chunk of the infrastructure is tied to a foreign supply chain, especially when the geopolitical relationship is getting a bit tense. So what is the US doing? The short version is building pressure to what the government can buy, but also instituting tariffs and, in some cases, a total ban. And there's also a clock on this, as I was talking about. Basically, this idea that either we get comfortable with this or the default is just not going to be allowed. Given that up until this point, there's no real review that seems to have happened, likely the case that a ban is going to happen. So then you might be wondering, what are we going to do? I think really in a lot of this, it's pushing towards building more of a domestic supply chain. Many folks will say we can't do it, or it's not possible, or there's no way we can be price competitive. But there's a lot of factors that play into that, and longer term, a lot of things are possible, but you really just need to be strategic about it. You need to build up that supply chain because there's so many parts that make up a drone. The motor, batteries, flight controllers, and printed circuit boards, sensors and cameras, radios, data links, composites and structures, software, autonomy, and security layers. So if you ask the question of can we build this stuff? Sure, we can, and we actually are building more and more of it. But in order to get to scale, it's going to take time. So the question isn't really can you build one, it's can you build tens of thousands of these, potentially millions. And then you need to support them, repair them, update them, certify them, and do it competitively. And here's the link back to the regulatory stuff. If Part 108 and beyond visual line of sight unlock real scale, not demos or pilots, but actual repeatable operations, you start moving from dozens of these units into thousands and potentially more. And that starts to make manufacturing a lot more viable. That starts to get folks interested. So that demand becomes predictable, factories invest, suppliers invest, prices come down, and reliability goes up. It might not always be so evident to the general public, but I'll tell you, as somebody that's been working a lot with these manufacturers and suppliers and even some of the hardware companies, it's happening. And really, this is how an industry forms. But it's clear how the threat of war is really a driver in this. And it brings me to this question I keep on asking myself, and it's something I might want to make a video on, is can we re-industrialize without going to war? My first answer to that is we kind of have to, because we've seen what the country can do when they decide something actually matters. I really hope that we don't need conflict to rebuild our capacity, but certainly the threat of conflict is driving a lot of this. So I guess I'm saying is that drones seem to be one of those categories where commercial value and strategic value actually overlap. So we might be able to build a real ecosystem. And those opportunities don't really come along often. One thing that I'm really excited about is the potential to build other things on top of that. And if we do it right, the upside is not just national security. It's jobs, capability, resilience. and an industry that touches everything from emergency response to infrastructure to logistics. So there's a lot more I can cover on this topic, and probably videos I should make on some of these individual topics. But to answer that question, are we going to see drones? I hope you guys are with me that I think the answer is yes, but I'd love to hear what you guys think about this. Have you actually seen some commercial drone operations in your area? Have you received a delivery? Are you working in this space? Are you Part 107 pilot? Or have you gotten this waiver? What's the experience? What's your outlook? What are you thinking? Are you nervous about this DJI thing? Anyway, lots to talk about. Looking forward to doing more of these, and see you soon. Take care.